Good evening from a Downing Street in Meltdown. In the last hour, two senior cabinet ministers have resigned. First, the Health Secretary, followed swiftly by the Chancellor of the Exchequer. They did so minutes after the Prime Minister himself issued an apology about the appointment of Chris Pincher, the former Deputy Chief Whip, who'd been accused of sexual misconduct. In his letter of resignation, Rishi Sunak said that the public had the right to be governed properly, competently and seriously. A swelling number of Tory MPs had long felt that this is not what they were getting from the Prime Minister. Now they've been joined in devastating fashion by two prominent frontbenchers. A week ago, the public had barely heard of Chris Pincher. Now it could be the name forever associated with the fate of Boris Johnson in the House behind me. It is tonight hard to see how the Prime Minister can survive this. We will stay on air for an extended programme to bring you all the reaction. Amid a growing backlash from the Conservative benches, how many more will decide that they've lost confidence in his leadership? 10 minutes is a long time in British politics tonight. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, joins me now from the Central Lobby in Parliament. Gary.
Well, it's only 4 weeks, talking about short periods, since the vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. Tory backbenchers then turned round to the cabinet ministers in the middle rank and said, it's over to you now. We tried, we pushed, but we didn't quite push him off the ledge. And today, two cabinet ministers, two people that Boris Johnson appointed as Chancellor, decided that they had had enough, and the letters make extraordinary reading. Here's what Rishi Sunak says in his resignation letter. He says, the public rightly expect government to be conducted properly, competently and seriously. And he's clearly implying that Boris Johnson isn't proving to be capable of doing any of those things. Our people know, he goes on, that if something is too good to be true, then it's not true. And what he's talking about there is Boris Johnson's handling of the economy. So not the Pincher affair, but the economy. And he goes on to say, in preparation for our proposed joint speech on the economy next week, it has become clear to me that our approaches are fundamentally too different. And so he has touched on the issue of character there, but also said he basically thinks the Prime Minister, and we've heard this repeatedly from leaks in the time that he's been at the Treasury, he thinks the Prime Minister just wants to splash the cash and isn't responsible. The two of them couldn't come together with a joint speech, something that had been talked about for ages, and so he has decided to go on those two grounds. Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, the man, as we said, Boris Johnson originally appointed to be Chancellor, says in his resignation letter to the Prime Minister, the vote of confidence last month was a moment for humility, grip and new direction. I regret to say, however, it is clear to me that this situation will not change under your leadership, and you, therefore, have lost my confidence too. The two men have let it be known through advisers that they didn't coordinate this, and they're certainly coming at it with slightly different approaches, criticisms of the Prime Minister. But the thing that those two letters have in common is a suggestion that Boris Johnson lacks the character to be Prime Minister. And what we're all waiting for now is, are there going to be other resignations out there from other ministers? We know that some of them were incredibly fatigued by the whole process of going out, touring the studios and repeating a line from Number 10, which then collapsed over the course of the last few days. Here's how things went here so far.
They both sat through Cabinet this morning. The Prime Minister trying to bind his team together, little realising his government was about to fall apart. Rishi Sunak's resignation came in the last hour, moments after the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid's. Several faces around Cabinet this morning were etched with anxiety and weariness. For two Cabinet ministers, today that has tipped into revolt.
We pray that you will send your blessing this day on our Prime Minister and on every...
Maybe there was a bad connection. At a prayer breakfast this morning, his head bowed just before prayers began, Boris Johnson appeared to be looking at his iPhone, just as news broke that a retired senior civil servant had contradicted his claim he'd known nothing specific about previous allegations about Chris Pincher. Former head of the Foreign Office, Lord MacDonald, wrote to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards complaining about inaccurate claims by 10 Downing Street. He then went on the radio to underline the point.
Number 10 have had 5 full days to get the story correct, and that has still not happened. I think they need to come clean.
My understanding, the Prime Minister has not been aware of specific allegations against Chris Pincher.
For 3 days, ministers and spokesmen were sent out to repeat what Boris Johnson and his team had told them was true.
Did the Prime Minister mislead you, Mr Raab?
The line, the Prime Minister didn't know about specific allegations about Chris Pincher's past behaviour. Yesterday, Number 10 says the Prime Minister's memory was jogged as he was reminded that he'd been told about a 2019 investigation into groping by Chris Pincher, which had upheld the complaint.
Last week, when fresh allegations arose, the Prime Minister did not immediately recall the conversation in late 2019 about this incident. As soon as he was reminded, the Number 10 press office corrected their public lines. The position is that the Prime Minister acted with probity at all times.
Tory backbenchers, little realising how quickly their words would be acted on, called for ministers to resign.
Number 10 was previously accused without rebuttal of lacking leadership by Sue Gray in her report over what went on over Partygate. How many more of the 7 principles are they going to have to breach before my honourable friend will stand up and say enough is enough?
I think we're now on a half a dozen different variations of degrees of honesty with which the knowledge of these events has been addressed by Number 10.
The question that faces the government, and I would suggest my honourable and right honourable friends sat on the front bench, is for them to consider what they are being asked to say in public, which changes seemingly by the hour.
Boris Johnson's just returned to Number 10 to meet with closest advisers. History teaches us resignations at this level, at a time of acute crisis, can be survived sometimes, but not for long. And his Chancellor, and the former Chancellor he appointed, resigned citing some policy, but much about character. And that makes it much harder to stagger on.
Gary Gibbon reporting. Well, joining me now from the Houses of Parliament is the Minister for Brexit Opportunities, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Thank you so much for coming on the programme, Mr Rees-Mogg. Will you take this opportunity to resign from the Cabinet tonight?
No, of course I won't. I'm supporting the Prime Minister, who has a mandate from the British people, a majority of 80, that he won in an election just about 2.5 years ago.
But you've lost the Chancellor, you've lost the Health Secretary, you lost the confidence of the majority of your backbenchers, you lost by-elections. Surely it's time for him to quit, isn't it?
Well, I wouldn't get too excited about resignations. I think you have to look at what Macmillan said.
The Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Health Secretary, 2 senior members of the Cabinet. Not exciting.
Let me answer. It's better if we have a discussion rather than if you interrupt every 2 seconds. If you think of what happened to Macmillan when he lost his whole Treasury team, Peter Thorneycroft went and he referred to little local difficulties and went on as Prime Minister for years. When Salisbury lost Randolph Churchill, Churchill complained that he had forgotten Goshen. A new Chancellor was appointed, and Salisbury ended up being Prime Minister for more than a decade. So losing ministers is something that happens, and I thought the Chancellor made a very fair point in his letter when he said that his differences with the Prime Minister were simply too big. And I think we were seeing that in the tax rises that we were getting that were very much led by the Treasury. The corporation tax rise that we're facing next year, that it was reported that the Prime Minister wanted to see reversed, and that actually you need a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who have the same vision for the country. That's very important, it's very beneficial. And I think there were signs for some time that the relationship wasn't really working.
But the country has every excuse tonight for thinking that you may be in office, your government, but you are not in power, are you?
Well, if you look at the business going through the House of Commons, which is where I'm speaking to you from this evening, the government is getting its business through. This is the key difference between now and when Theresa May was Prime Minister, that Theresa May could not get her business through because she did not command a majority in the House of Commons, whereas Boris Johnson continues to command a majority in the House of Commons, and some important and controversial votes have been won in recent weeks.
If there was another no-confidence vote today in the Prime Minister amongst the rank and file of your party in the House of Commons, surely he would lose this time, wouldn't he?
Well, how do you know? That's just speculation. He won very recently, and the rules as they currently are say there won't be another vote for a year. And I think it's a bit silly to get into changing the rules to have a contest week in, week out, that these things need to be settled for a set amount of time, and then, of course, it's legitimate to go back to the electorate.
You seem remarkably calm tonight, Mr. Rees-Mogg. I wonder if you're backing the Prime Minister because you fear that the next incumbent of number 10, the building behind me, won't give you a job in the Cabinet.
Oh no, that doesn't matter beans to me. I'm in the Cabinet because I like supporting the Prime Minister, in whom I have great confidence. I have no desire to serve another Prime Minister.
Do you think the Prime Minister is at all capable of telling the truth on matters that are interesting to the British public?
Of course the Prime Minister tells the truth, and that's a very prejudicial question, I think. Well, I'm not entirely sure it meets your requirements to be impartial.
Excuse me, the Prime Minister first of all said that there was nothing to know about Chris Pincher. Then when he was confronted with the inconvenient truth that in fact he had been told by the former head of the Foreign Office that there was a history of sexual misconduct, he suddenly changed his tune and apologised. I mean, surely he's always doing that, whether it's Partygate or the Chris Pincher business. This is the cycle: denial, acceptance, apology.
I think this is fanciful. I think it's perfectly reasonable that people do forget things. You know perfectly well, you've been around politics quite long enough, that there are always rumours going around. Dare I say, there are even sometimes rumours about journalists. Some of them turn out to be true, some of them turn out to be completely unfounded. Some people get into trouble about whom there have never been rumours at all, and others, as is the case with Chris Pincher, get into difficulties when there have been rumours. But you can't govern on the base of rumour and tittle-tattle. That would be unfair and unjust.
Aren't you worried about the evidence that's stacking up against the Prime Minister, the by-election results, the no-confidence vote in your own party, the opinion polls further down the scale? I mean, it doesn't look as if he still has the trust of the country, let alone your party.
I think you must have a very short memory that to be a few points behind in the opinion polls in mid-term is actually quite an achievement. If you believed the opinion polls, Edward Miliband was going to become Prime Minister in 2015, and notably he didn't. By-elections, well, think of Orpington, think of the ones in the 1980s where Margaret Thatcher consistently lost by-elections and then won thumping majorities at the ensuing general elections. When there's a general election...
But to lose, sorry to interrupt, Mr. Rees-Mogg, but to lose a seat that had been in Tory hands for a century by a majority of 24,000 to the Lib Dems, that's more than just a blip in the opinion polls. That's serious business.
Is it? Bear in mind that we lost the seat to Shirley Williams in the early 1980s and won the following election with a majority of over 140. So I think you're not drawing the right historical connections from these by-election results. By-elections are difficult for governments in mid-term. Between 1987 and 1992, we lost quite a number of by-elections, every single one of which we won back in the 1992 general election.
Right. Since you're giving me lectures on history, how about Margaret Thatcher having to resign or Theresa May having to resign?
Well,
I mean, there are plenty of precedents heading in the other direction, aren't there?
Margaret Thatcher didn't win by a clear enough majority in the vote that Michael Heseltine brought against her, and Theresa May was being consistently defeated in the House of Commons, which of course is constitutionally much more important than a vote within a party, because the seat of power is in the House of Commons.
If you don't think the Prime Minister should resign right now, and you clearly don't, do you think that Chris Pincher should resign as an MP?
I think he must look to his conduct, and if the things that have been said about him are true, then I don't think he will remain as a Member of Parliament.
So that's a yes?
Well, you have to give somebody due process. He has to decide whether to go through the independent complaints service that the House of Commons provides. But if these complaints are true, you really can't have people in Parliament who have committed sexual assault.
Have you spoken to the Prime Minister in the last few minutes? What's his mood tonight?
I saw the Prime Minister earlier on this evening, and the Prime Minister is in a business-like mood, as you would expect. He's got a job to do, and a very important one.
But now he's missing a Chancellor, he's missing a Health Secretary. I mean, he lost the chairman of the party last week. I mean, surely this government is bleeding out in terms of its trust and its support.
No, it's the Prime Minister who has a mandate from the British people, and then he appoints a cabinet, and some people don't want to serve in it anymore, but they're eminently replaceable.
OK, Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's go now to Conservative MP Sir Bob Neal, who chairs the Justice Select Committee and was one of the MPs who submitted a letter of no confidence in Mr Johnson last month. Sir Bob Neal, good to have you back on the programme. You heard what Jacob Rees-Mogg just had to say. This is something that the Prime Minister can weather. It's not the end of the world for him. It's not the end of him in number 10. Do you buy that?
No, I don't, unfortunately. Very interesting little historical tour from Jacob, but I don't think it cuts much ice with the voters of the 21st century, what happened with Lord Salisbury. At the end of the day, I think, unfortunately, the Prime Minister has run out of road because he has lost credibility. And once you lose credibility, that erodes trust, and that cannot be replaced because it's a matter of people's character and how they behave, not even a matter of policy. So
but there are members of the cabinet, apparently Liz Truss, although we haven't heard from her, but it's possible. Certainly Dominic Raab and Nadine Dorries, who I just saw walking out of number 10 with a smile on her face not so long ago. They have stayed loyal to the Prime Minister. Is that enough in terms of front bench loyalty to keep him in post?
At the end of the day, to have to correct Mr Rees-Mogg again, a Prime Minister stays in office not because of any direct presidential mandate. We have no such concept in our constitution at all, but provided they can maintain a majority, the confidence of a majority in the House of Commons. And secondly, of course, ultimately, it is the totality of the Conservative Party membership, parliamentary party in the first instance, that decides whether or not they have confidence. So each member of the cabinet, each member of the government must perfectly properly act according to their own conscience, and I'll respect them to do so.
But Sir Bob, if the Prime Minister himself doesn't resign, he can hang on, can't he? Certainly until the summer recess, because you won't get another vote of no confidence in him from the party unless you change the rules of the 1922 backbench committee. And even if there are more resignations, he might find enough loyalists to fill those posts in the cabinet.
Well, all things are possible, but I hope the Prime Minister and others would look to the national interests. And I don't believe a government that would be so hobbled and seen, I think, in the country as something akin to a lame duck would be in our interests. I want the Conservative Party to win the next election, and to do that, it's got to make a change swiftly and completely reset its approach, predominantly by straight talking to people and then actually getting action on the really critical issues that matter to the country. In terms of process, we all know that actually the rules are flexible, and we'll have to see how that develops. But you'll have seen a precedent, of course, much more recent than some of those that were quoted to you just now, in the case of Theresa May, who, when told, having won a vote of confidence a short time before by a larger margin, as it happens, than Mr Johnson had in his vote of confidence, when, in effect, I think, advised us to a change in the arithmetic, acted honourably and departed.
Finally, Sir Bob Neal, how would you describe the state of this government, the state of this country tonight?
Well, I think it is a tragic situation, because all the good work that the government has been doing and seeking to do, things like the vaccine rollout, things that we are trying to do to assist people with the cost of living pressures, things that the leadership that we're giving in Ukraine are drowned out by all of these matters. And if people stop listening to us because of their view as to the character of our leadership, then I'm afraid it makes us impossible to make the case for the positive things that we are doing in the national interest. And that's the principal reason why I think we need to have a change.
Sir Bob Neal, thank you very much indeed. I'm not sure if you can hear the music. There's some Papa music, a military band, round the corner from Downing Street. I can assure you that whatever they're doing over there, that is not the mood in the building behind me tonight. Let's just bring you up to speed of tonight's fast-moving news here in Westminster. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, and the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, have both resigned tonight, minutes after Boris Johnson apologised for appointing Chris Pincher to a government role, saying it had been a mistake. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said it was clear that the government was now collapsing. Well, let's not forget where this whole scandal started, with allegations of inappropriate behaviour by the former Deputy Chief Whip, Chris Pincher. Tonight, this programme can reveal that two police forces, Staffordshire and the Met, received reports of sexual assault by a man believed to be Mr Pincher. one in 2019 and one 6 years earlier in 2013, but no action was taken. Mr Pincher emphatically denies any wrongdoing. Our Home Affairs correspondent Darshna Soni is in Mr Pincher's constituency of Tamworth with all the details. Darshna.
Well, I'm at the Town Hall in Tamworth, Matt, where in the last hour a full meeting of the Tory-led Borough Council has taken place. Many of the council members were told in that meeting about the resignations in Westminster. But tonight we have revelations about the local MP, Chris Pincher. Two police forces, Staffordshire Police and the London's Met, have both separately confirmed to us 2 reports of sexual assault. Now, Staffordshire Police, near Mr Pincher's constituency home, told us that they received a report of sexual assault 3 years ago by a man of his age at Mr Pincher's home address. The force confirmed that they received that report in May 2019, but no further action was taken, they say, in line with the wishes of the person making that alleged assault, and no arrests were made. Now, this raises more questions for Downing Street because of the date, May 2019. It came just a few months before Mr Pincher's promotion by Boris Johnson to a senior ministerial role in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Now, that would be serious enough. But we have also learnt that the Met Police also conducted separate inquiries into a man believed to be Mr Pincher after receiving a report detailing alleged sexual assault between 2010 and 2012. Now, officers conducted a number of inquiries, including speaking to an alleged victim. But again, no further action was taken and no arrests were made. So what did the government know about any of this? Well, we have reached out to the Foreign Office and Downing Street tonight for a comment, but we haven't heard back from any of them as yet. We've also, of course, approached Mr Pincher and his lawyers for comment. We're told that he emphatically denies the allegations and says that he has no recollection of any conduct which would have resulted in a complaint. He says that he wasn't contacted by Staffordshire Police or the Met Police, and that the first he knew of it was when we told him today. So how's this playing out in his constituency? Well, events have been so fast moving today. We caught up with some constituents here and asked them their reaction.
Well, to be honest, if I've got to answer that many questions about my job over the last, 7 months, 8 months, why is he still in power?
You can't run a government the way he's running it, which is in denial most of the time. How many times can you deny? It is a limitation, actually. So, from my point, I vote Conservative. I still vote Conservative. But sure as hell I want a new Prime Minister.
I'm just appalled by their behaviour. I'm appalled by everything that they've done. Their standards are absolutely disgusting. They disgust me from here.
So a lot of unease here about these developments, including within the local Tory party. Now, we've been approaching councillors for comment, including when they left this meeting tonight. Officially, they've been told not to say anything on camera, but such is the strength of feeling here that many reached out to us off the record and said there is real anger about what has been going on and the way that these alleged incidents have been handled by the party nationally. Now, we're told that yesterday there was a meeting of Tory party members to discuss whether they still had support and faith in their local MP. I'm told that initially the room was split until it emerged that there has been another allegation locally by a local man who is an activist in the party. And we're told that within the next day or two, he will be making a formal complaint. We're also told that we can expect to hear from the local party in the next day or two about whether formally they still have faith in their local MP.
Thanks, Darshna. Thanks very much. Well, let's go straight to Christian, who's in the Parliament.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Christian.
I'm in Central Lobby with another minister who has resigned, Andrew Morrison, and Labour's Chris Bryant. Andrew Morrison, what have you done and why?
Well, I've resigned as trade envoy with immediate effect because I can no longer serve under the patronage of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister.
What took you so long?
Well, you could well ask. I've been mulling over this for some considerable time. I think probably the by-elections, it's very clear that the public do not support Boris, and the only way I can see forward is for him to resign now and for us to prepare for the general election with a new leader.
What do you think is going on right now? I mean, why haven't more ministers, more cabinet ministers resigned or said Boris Johnson should go?
Well, I think probably when you report at 10 o'clock, the picture may look very different.
You think
indeed.
he'll be gone?
No, I suspect probably there'll be more resignations. I think what we've seen is the beginning of the end, and I just hope that it comes to an end decorously.
Is this being coordinated? Or is everybody acting unilaterally?
Not to my knowledge. I'm certainly not coordinated with anybody. I just have to act in accordance with my own conscience.
I mean, you have to say, why not? I mean, you're a political party. If you're not coordinating getting rid of the Prime Minister, what are you doing?
Getting rid of the Prime Minister is a very big thing, and my party is instinctively loyal. Many of us appreciate the things that Boris Johnson have done, and which I duly pay tribute to. But the time has come for us to have a new leader so we can move on.
Who do you want to replace him?
There are plenty of people in my party, in the Cabinet, outside the Cabinet and on the backbenches. We are spoilt for choice.
How quickly can it be done? I mean, the argument from the Boris Johnson supporters has always been the country cannot afford a long period without a working Prime Minister.
I hope it can be done quickly. That said, of course, the business of government goes on, and it has in the past at times of crisis.
How deep a political crisis would you say this is now?
Well, it's very deep indeed. So we need to deal with this. We need to deal with it now, and I strongly suspect that a great deal is happening behind the scenes to make sure that we move on as quickly as possible.
I mean, would you say Boris Johnson is now behaving irresponsibly by staying?
I think he should consider the damage he's doing to the Conservative Party, whether that position is recoverable.
The damage to the country, sure.
And more importantly, the damage it's doing to the country.
Andrew Morrison, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, let's just hear very briefly an interview with Angela Rayner, which has just been released.
Yeah, I think Boris Johnson should have gone a long time ago. I think that, you know, cabinet members that have suddenly found a conscience, that's all well and good, but I think the rest of the cabinet need to go now and need to do the right thing by the British public. You know, it's pretty obvious that Boris Johnson's not fit to be Prime Minister, and I'm glad that some of the cabinet are starting to grow a backbone and realise that.
What do you think? When do you think Boris Johnson will go then?
Well, I think he should have gone a long time ago, but the problem with Boris Johnson is he lacks any integrity, hence why he took it out of the report into the ministerial code. He doesn't believe in honesty, he doesn't believe in integrity, he doesn't believe in the Nolan principles that prop up public office. But I'm glad that some of the cabinet are realising that. The rest of them should do the right thing and resign as well. And the Conservative Party should be ashamed that they've propped him up for as long as they have done.
With me now is the senior Labour MP, Chris Bryant. What is the opposition's role now? You are Her Majesty's loyal opposition. You now have a responsibility, don't you, when the country is in crisis?
I want us to have a general election because I'm mystified why Andrew Morrison, whom I quite like, we've chatted about this over the last few months, I don't understand why he's taken so long to come to this conclusion, because in the end, if you're to rule, if you're to govern this country, especially in a time of international crisis in Ukraine and a cost of living crisis in the UK, you have to have moral authority. And if you are constantly lying yourself and you're sending your ministers out to lie on your behalf, the whole system falls apart.
But why should there be an election? There is a mandate for a Conservative government. We don't have a presidential system.
No.
There should be a Conservative Prime Minister.
Well,
why have a general election?
Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg was on earlier saying that the Prime Minister has this mandate and that overcomes everything else. I'm sorry, we don't live in a presidential system, and I don't want us to live in a presidential system. We have a parliamentary system. It is absolutely clear now that if you add up the 148 Tory MPs and all the opposition MPs, the Prime Minister does not command the confidence of the House of Commons. But in the end, in our system, it's up to the Tories to do their job. Now, I hope and I presume that Sajid Javid and Rishi Sunak will tomorrow do personal statements in the House of Commons, as is traditional, as happened Geoffrey Howe did with Mrs Thatcher. That may be the moment when Boris Johnson finally reads the writing on the wall. But the truth is, I bet you you will have to drag him out by the ankles. And that is bad for British politics. The worst thing of all is we used to be known as a country as a place of reliable honour. Your word was your bond. If we signed a treaty, we meant it. We stood by it. And when the country gets a reputation through its Prime Minister for lying, that ruins the reputation of the country.
I mean, Boris Johnson, as you say, has shown no sign of believing he should go. He thinks he is in the right.
Yes, so he always acquits himself in the court of his own public opinion.
Yes, and he did win an election, but clearly Britain is in a political paralysis now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have to appeal to him as an individual, don't you? What do you say to him?
There's no point in appealing to him. He's a man without a moral compass. This is him. This is what he does. And why I'm angry with a lot of Conservatives is that they've always known this. They've known this from the beginning of time, that this is what a Boris Johnson government would look like. All these different scandals, week after week after week, and now suddenly discovering that he did actually know that Chris Pincher was a major problem, that actually he thought that all the sex pests were supporting him for the leadership and made jokes about it. The fact that, of course, his cronies and his allies have been taking liberties for months, that's all down to him. So making an appeal to him doesn't work. I mean, the only people who can do this are Conservative MPs. And I say there are lots of junior ministers who are thoroughly decent people who had proper professional jobs before they came in here. Why have they not yet resigned?
But if you're talking about the stability of the country now as well and what's good for Britain, the truth is, if Boris Johnson did what you suggest, steps down and there's a general election, Keir Starmer could be gone within days as well. There could be no leader of the opposition.
I don't believe that's the case.
Well, it's perfectly possible because he said he would resign if he's fined. So we have to consider that. Yes, but we have to consider that as a scenario. That we could have no leader of the opposition, no leader of the government. Yeah. That is a disaster.
But I don't believe this argument that just because there's an international crisis or a national crisis that we can't change Prime Minister. We changed Prime Minister in the First World War, in the Second World War, in the Second Boer War, in the Second Opium War, 4 times in the Afghan War, and so on. It is perfectly possible to change Prime Minister at a key time because actually this country and our democracy is more resolute and more solid than one man. The problem with that one man at the moment is that he poisons the well of our democracy every day he stays in office.